says the president of Burundi also recently died from cardiac arrest in June. Burundi's administration declined the vaccines in February, claiming that since more than 95% of patients are recovering, we estimate that vaccines are not yet necessary in the African nation.
He refused to play along with COVID and instructed the WHO delegation to leave his country before dying suddenly of a heart attack or suspected COVID-19. And then his successor immediately reversed every single one of his COVID policies, including inviting the WHO back into the country. That was in Burundi. You may have already heard that Tanzanian President John Magufuli has died. It's sad because Magufuli was a champion for his people. He stood up for them. He cut corruption. Magufuli is well known for his trick he pulled on the COVID testing lab in his country. He covertly sent samples of papaya, motor oil, goats, and other things, other non-human things. He gave them human names and he sent them to the lab. And sure enough, some of those results came back positive for COVID. And he didn't implement any of the social distancing policies, none of the lockdown policies, and none of the masking policies. He avoided the fear-mongering campaign. It's important to note that Magufuli didn't just die. He had disappeared for weeks before his death was finally reported, and no one knew what was happening to him. Magufuli graduated from Dar es Salaam University with a doctorate in chemistry. He also worked in the industry. So he knew what he was talking about, and he used his knowledge to make the WHO, the World Health Organization, look foolish. So you can see where this is going. He's standing up to the typical global powers in a big way. And then all of a sudden, he goes missing and dies at the age of 61. I don't know, it's a little suspicious to me.
The president of Tanzania, John Magufuli, died also of a heart attack. Magufuli also denied vaccine distribution in his country and instead urged for Tanzanian citizens to pray coronavirus away. Magufuli, upset at the medical establishment, also mocked the efficacy of the PCR test, and that's not a shocker. I mean, even the creator of the PCR test mocked the efficacy of the PCR test by showing how a goat and a pawpaw fruit both tested positive for COVID-19. Following his death, Tanzania put in an order to the WHO for a shipment of COVID vaccines for its 60 million citizens. Come on, you have to stop and think for a moment here. You have to stop and think that something very interesting is going on. And if you think that it's too crazy of a conspiracy theory to suggest that the U.S. government is involved in the regime changes and in the assassinations of these presidents, then you don't know history. And frankly, you're too naive to get it.
But scientists say even that doesn't explain Haiti's stunningly low COVID-19 death. But Moïse says there is a relationship Haitians have with nature that protects them from coronavirus, and a plant that produces certain tea called asosimo that's made with ginger root. I'm telling you what I've witnessed, he says, but scientifically, I cannot say.
You're the one close to the border.
The Moïse administration missed the first round of a nearly million free AstraZeneca vaccinations months ago, but says even when his country accepts them, we cannot force people to get the shot. Meanwhile, on stops in small towns, the president, who is wearing a mask, is a magnet for big crowds.
Police in Haiti claiming taking swift action in response to the assassination of the president Jovenel Moise. Police say they arrested 2 suspects and killed 4 others in connection with the president's death. The Haitian ambassador to the U.S. says all 6 were foreigners. Police have not yet determined their nationalities. It comes as new video posted on social media is said to show security outside of the private residence after the attack. In another audio clip, a person can be heard shouting, "DEA operation." Listen.
DEA operations, everybody stand down. DEA operations, everybody back up, stand down.
Now, CNN cannot independently confirm the authenticity of the audio or the video. The U.S. State Department denies the attackers were DEA agents. A spokesman calls the claims absolutely false. Now, a state of siege has been declared in Haiti.
To the dailymail.com and according to a couple of other reports from the Washington Post, the Associated Press, a lot of these guys were either FBI informants, DEA informants, or working with the federal government in some capacity. And we're finding out just now that a lot of the Colombians that were arrested in the plot, the Colombians were actually trained by the U.S. military at some point. Most of the people involved at the top of the plot, the planning of the plot, were U.S. citizens working with the federal government, either the FBI informants or in some other capacity. So this is very interesting. What's even more interesting about this story, though, is that Haiti's president marks the 3rd president who has died within the past few months alone that presided over countries who rejected the distribution of the vaccine in their country. Joseph Vincent, 55, has been named by sources to the Miami Herald as one of the informants. Vincent was one of 3 U.S. citizens arrested for being behind, like in the planning of the early morning raid on the president's home. The 2 others named are James Salages and Christian Emmanuel Sinan. Approximately 20 Colombians are under arrest for the assassination. According to a report, several of the arrested suspects are FBI informants, and many of the Colombians were once trained by the U.S. military, according to the Washington Post. An associate of Sinan suggested that Washington, D.C. backed the president's assassination, claiming their friend said the mission was supposed to, quote, save Haiti from hell with full support from the U.S. government. Vincent reportedly claimed the plot was orchestrated by a foreigner named Mike, who spoke English and Spanish. The 2 men, who both lived in Florida, said the mission was to arrest the president and not kill him. Salages said he found his job on the internet. Okay. This is definitely the CIA. Come on. This is 100% a CIA operation, a regime change operation. We've seen it before hundreds of times throughout U.S. history. It looks just like this. It goes on. It says the associate who spoke on the condition of anonymity said Sinan told him he was approached by people claiming to represent the U.S. State and Justice Departments who wanted to install him as president. Now, here's the kicker. The Haitian president who died, who was murdered, who was assassinated, was the latest of 3 presidents to die that presided over nations that refused the distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. Now, after their deaths, all of a sudden, all the nations now are distributing U.S.-applied COVID jabs to their citizens.
Με την απόπειρα δωροδοκίας του Προέδρου της Λευκορωσίας όταν το Διεθνές Νομισματικό Ταμείο του πρόσφερε $950 εκατομμύρια για να εφαρμόσει τα ίδια μέτρα με την Ιταλία στη χώρα και αυτός απέρριψε ριζικά την προσφορά.
Заявлено о возможности предоставить Беларуси $940 миллионов, так называемого быстрого финансирования. Хочу заявить, что мы ни под кого плясать не будем. Там уже появляются требования. Вы, мол, в борьбе с коронавирусом в Беларуси делайте как в Италии. Слушайте, я не хочу, чтобы, не дай бог, повторилась ситуация в Беларуси, как в Италии. Я этого не хочу. У нас своя страна, своя ситуация. И дай бог, что мы дальше закончили с этим коронавирусом, как сейчас. Уже Всемирный банк готов нас профинансировать в 10 раз больше, чем предлагал, за то, что мы эффективно боремся с этой болезнью. Даже опыт запросил у Минздрава. А МВФ продолжает требовать от нас: вы давайте изоляцию, давайте карантин, давайте комендантский час. Слушайте, что за глупость?
effectivement, nous avons lancé ce remède à base de plantes médicinales malagasy. Il faut noter qu'à Madagascar, nous avons l'habitude, et 80% de la population se soigne à travers le remède médicinal. Ceci dit, le Covid Organics est bien évidemment un remède préventif et curatif contre le Covid-19 qui fonctionne très bien. Et d'ailleurs, c'est le fruit des recherches réalisées par l'Institut malagasy de recherche appliquée, qui a le statut de centre régional de recherche par l'Organisation de l'Union africaine. Je tiens juste à préciser que l'IMRA est un centre de recherche médicale et pharmaceutique et de formation fondé en 1957 par le professeur Ratsimamang, qui est une figure émérite de la science africaine.
Alors justement, par exemple, on va prendre l'exemple de la France. L'Agence nationale de sécurité du médicament a très récemment publié une mise en garde quant à l'achat de produits à base d'artémisia, affirmant que les vertus thérapeutiques sont, je cite cette agence, fausses et dangereuses. Alors, est-ce que vous avez l'impression que ces doutes, voire des soupçons, disons-le, de charlatanisme, viennent de l'Occident, voire peut-être des lobbies pharmaceutiques occidentaux ?
Vous savez, vous avez peut-être pu voir et regarder la déclaration du professeur Montagnier, qui a quand même reçu le prix Nobel de la science et de la médecine. Comme quoi l'artémisia, c'est une piste pour guérir en fait le coronavirus. Ça, c'est une chose. Mais vous avez aussi pu en fait constater l'étude du professeur P.O.Υ en Chine, qui a pu extraire en fait l'artémisinine venant de l'artémisia. Donc aujourd'hui, je ne comprends pas pourquoi autant de questions, pourquoi autant de problèmes. Mais le problème aujourd'hui avec le Covid Organics n'est pas sa formule. Ce ne sont pas des études cliniques qu'on fait semblant de ne pas connaître. On dit du mal sur ce produit, sur le Tambave CVO, alors qu'il ne fait que du bien et qu'il ne sauve que des vies actuellement. Dans cette bataille, on veut nous freiner, on veut nous décourager, voire même nous interdire d'avancer.
C'est qui on ?
Vous avez cité l'organisation tout à l'heure, l'Organisation mondiale de la santé. On, c'est nous, Madagascar, avec notre décoction que nous sommes en train, et personne ne peut nous empêcher. Nous sommes un pays souverain et nous sommes là pour aider notre peuple, notre population, pour ne pas vraiment être victime ou mourir de cette pandémie. Il ne faut pas en fait sous-estimer les scientifiques africains et les scientifiques malagasy. Nous sommes là. Et c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, il y a des questions qui se posent. Pourquoi ? C'est quoi le problème du Covid Organics ? Moi, je pense que le problème, c'est que ça vient d'Afrique. Et on ne peut pas admettre, on ne peut pas accepter qu'un pays comme Madagascar, qui est le 63e pays le plus pauvre du monde, ait mis en place, en fait, ce formule, ce Tambave pour sauver le monde. Mais en fait, là, il ne s'agit pas de... C'est une guerre, mais une guerre qui... ce n'est pas la force militaire ou également la puissance économique qui joue actuellement, mais Dieu et le Seigneur nous a donné les plantes médicinales pour aider nos pays, les autres pays et le monde entier pour lutter contre cette maladie.